Cosmic Geppetto podcast is brought to you by MuseGuitarist.com. For help creating your own amazing music, from advice, production, or awesome guitar work, contact Brad Hewitt at admin@MuseGuitarist.com or visit www.museguitarist.com. From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host, we all float down here, Brad Mendenhall.
Hey everybody, it is a jug-headed episode of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Comic book writer and editor Paul Kupperberg joins me to talk about his decades-long career. But first, as we are all stuck in quarantine, I asked friends how they are passing time. Travis Bowe shared the following.
Hey there, this is Travis Bowe from the Real Comic Heroes podcast, and I just wanted to share one of the ways I'm passing the time during self-quarantine. I've been reading a lot more comics via the Marvel Unlimited app. I have a subscription through them, so I'm able to read tons of comics that they have. The way I'm using it is to go through kind of the some of the original Marvel superhero comics that came out in the 60s when Marvel became Marvel Comics and Stan came out with Fantastic Four and the Avengers and Iron Man and Thor and X-Men. So all these great old comics that I've never had a chance to read through Marvel Unlimited, I'm able to read them. And instead of just reading, like binge reading all of Fantastic Four or X-Men or whatever, I'm treating it as if they're coming out, week to week. Like you go down to the store and you pick up your new issues for that month of all these stories. So for instance, I'll read Fantastic Four, and then I'll jump over to Tales of Suspense, which is kind of a split book between Iron Man and Captain America. And then I'll read Journey into Mystery, which is Thor's book. And then I'll jump into X-Men. So I read everything in sequential order, release order, if you will. And I like thinking that that's the way these books were originally presented. I could just binge read one book, and I did that when I first got Marvel Unlimited. I did that with Amazing Spider-Man because I wanted to read Spider-Man from the beginning. So I have done that, and I'm glad I've done that, of course. But the way I'm doing it now is to just go through all of the Marvel universe via comics from the beginning. It's interesting because I've never been a huge Fantastic Four fan, so I kind of thought that would be the biggest hurdle to get over. But breaking up those issues with other comics that are also coming out at around the same time has helped. And that's the way they would have been read originally. If you're a kid going down to the store to pick up the next issue of Fantastic Four, you've got to wait a month before the next one. So during that time, you might pick up Thor or Iron Man or whatever else. And I've really been enjoying this read through of the Marvel Universe. And it's certainly, this didn't start because of the self-quarantine kind of time period that we're in. I've been doing this for the better part of a year because it takes a long time to read 7 or 8 different books, 12 issues a year. All those comics add up, but because of that app, I'm able to read them all, and it's been really fun. So I highly recommend the Marvel Unlimited app. It's reading comics is a great way to pass the time. If you don't mind reading them on a phone. There are a few different ways you can flip through them. It doesn't have to be on your phone. It could be on your iPad or I'm pretty sure even your desktop, maybe even a TV. But I like it on the phone just fine. So you can zoom in and you're not really losing detail or anything. And they've done a good job of transferring these old books, and they've kind of recolored them so they're pretty vibrant. So far, just about everything looks really good. So I'm from the Real Comic Heroes podcast, and over there we created a big list of comic book movies. We're going through that list chronologically. We started with Superman and the Mole Men from 1951, and as of this recording, we're all the way into 1991. We just recorded with Ralph from TV's Cake Boss. We had him on for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. And we also just got done discussing The Rocketeer, which will be out soon. So, yeah, we're in the 90s now and working our way, always working towards present day in release order. So it's fun going through this big list of comic book movies and just learning the way the genre has changed, the way filmmaking has changed, and it'll be really interesting to get into the later 90s and then into the 2000s with kind of the more modern comic book movies. So we have about 90 episodes that you can listen to now of previous comic book movies, a few other special episodes or off-topic episodes that aren't movie reviews. But if you're interested in hearing what we think about some of these movies, you can go over there and subscribe. You can find Real Comic Heroes on just about any podcast platform. Real spelled with 2 E's, like the movie Real. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks to Brad and Cosmic Geppetto for letting me share my thoughts on the Marvel Unlimited app and what you can do with it. So I hope you enjoy and stay safe out there.
Excited. We have just a really neat guest with us today. The world of comics and the world of writing are filled with people who've done really cool work and worked on iconic stories and with iconic characters, but you may not know them because they tend to be behind the scenes. And we have one of those guys who's just worked on some amazing stuff, Paul Kupperberg. Paul, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, and going over your bibliography, you've written Spider-Man, you've written the Justice Society, Wishbone Mysteries, that's cool, and some neat a Tom and Jerry syndicated newspaper strip, World's Greatest Heroes. Some of this really neat is you did some work on Archie comics and some really neat recent work.
Yeah, that was the death of Archie. Well, not death. It ended in the death of Archie. It was the Life with Archie series, which was a book that had 2 stories every issue. One that was set. They were both set about 6 or 8 years in the future, after the gang has left college and are out in the world. And one story showed what might happen if he married Betty, and the other storyline showed what might happen if he married Veronica. That was a lot of fun to do. It was kind of Archie meets Beverly Hills 9. Well, actually more like Archie meets Melrose Place, because they were out of school.
That story got a lot of buzz when it was coming out, because it was also sort of putting a cap on the classic Archie.
Yeah, it was the first time they really broke the mold from the classic Archie stuff. Outside of the goofy, teen superhero things they might have done in the 60s and 70s and stuff. But this was the first time they took Archie off into a serious direction and just let it happen. I mean, we were in the 3 or 4 years that we ran, we did storylines on everything from marital problems to business problems, breast cancer, gay marriage, gun violence, breast cancer. Did I say breast cancer? We did a lot of important subjects.
When you see, and I guess this just finished the 2nd or 3rd season, Riverdale, which is a very a modern take on the Archie comics, do you see your own influence there? Was there an edict presented to you as like, hey, we want to try to make this a little more modern, so to have this wider media appeal?
What originally, it was a story by Michael Uslan, who is the producer of the Batman movies. He did a 6-issue Archie in Love storyline, which started the dual future story thing. And that was a 6-issue miniseries in the Archie series. And it was so successful, they wanted to spin it off. And Michael wrote the first issue of the new series, but I picked it up after him. So I didn't exactly initiate the idea, but I did develop it. I mean, I was the one who took it off in that particular direction, and they were with me the whole way, the editors and publisher at Archie. But so yes, I think I did have a lot of influence on that. Thank you for asking.
It's very interesting because Archie, and for a long time that was the appeal. The people who were into it, it never changed. It was always
correct.
The love triangle between Archie, Betty, and Veronica, and Jughead wants his hamburgers, and there's something very safe about that. But the problem is, over time, it didn't change at all, so it felt so dated.
I mean, I also wrote some classic Archie stuff, and it's not necessarily dated. I mean, it's just, you outgrow it. We outgrow these things, and that doesn't mean it's dated. It means that we've been reading it for a while, we've seen it, but the next generation hasn't. As far as Archie goes, when it came time to take these guys out of that very safe little insulated humor world they lived in, all the characters, and in fact, I discovered this writing just regular Archie humor. The characters had very definite personalities and very, very well worked out motivations and characters. It came time to write them in a serious setting. I didn't have any problem taking Jughead and turning him into a guy who's trying to struggle with starting a business and relationships or whatever. I had no trouble turning that guy into the goofy I want a hamburger, Jughead into a real character, because in one of the humor stories I did, the gang are going through Jughead's attic looking for something. They find a treasure map. It turns out it looks like Dillinger had buried his treasure in the backyard when the house was owned by Jughead's grandfather. So the gang spends all afternoon digging up the backyard looking for the treasure. And there is no treasure. Jughead planted the map there. He needed the backyard dug up for a new septic system. Jughead's actually the smartest guy in town. He's always pulling these tricks and getting people to do things for him and all that. So, the characters were there. Archie's the eternal do-gooder. He will trip over himself. The reason he trips over himself is he's in such a rush to do the good deed, to go help you, to be a guy, to be the guy. He just, winds up falling all over himself.
He's always been the good guy who wants to do the right thing and almost gets tripped up by his own good nature.
Yeah, exactly. And I carried that through into the grown-up character, and it works, So they all had those characteristics, and it really wasn't hard at all to make the transition.
So when you're writing, you have basically two alternate universes: one where Archie ends up with Betty, one where he ends up with Veronica. Was there one relationship that was easier to write?
Betty was the easier relationship to write, definitely. Yeah. Betty, by her nature, is less demanding a character than Veronica. So there was always going to be more of a struggle between Archie and Veronica, because there's going to be a lot more power struggle going on in the relationship. Whereas Betty is more inclined to kind of like, all right, goofy old Archie, he's got to fall on his face to see what's what.
Well, I always got the impression that Betty was the character that was really made for Archie. That's the one you were always supposed to be rooting for, and who would sort of get him at the end of the issue, and then, of course, things would sort of reset and the conflict would start over again. And Veronica was a little bit of a bad girl, or a little bit spoiled, and you would want to see her get her comeuppance. But then people end up liking that.
Yeah.
I could see Betty being a little easier to write because it was probably a little less forced to make that marriage happen.
Oh, no, it wasn't it's not a matter of being difficult to write. It's just a matter of the difficulty of the relationship between the characters. Frankly, conflict is easier to write than not. Otherwise, we'd be doing a lot of superhero stories about people going, no, nothing happening today.
Everything's cool.
Everything's good. So, see you later.
No, you wrote A Life with Archie. You had a nice run on that. And how was it switching? Because you've written some really classic superhero comics. What was the challenge going from action-oriented cliffhanger to more soap opera with a bit of comedy?
It's frankly not as different as you really think. Action is action, whether it's somebody flying through the air and punching somebody or two characters having an emotional conflict. It's a little trickier to write the emotional conflict because, to stage it to make it interesting. But I wrote a lot of Superman in the 1980s just before the crisis. I was one of the, 2 or 3 main writers on the character in those days. I was also writing Supergirl and Superboy and the Superman syndicated newspaper strip and issues of DC Comics Presents. So I was writing a ton of Superman. It comes down to every month having to come up with 4 or 5 different adversaries for God. So after a while, writing about the superpowered conflict becomes kind of it's a challenge, and you gotta do it. So you do gimmicks, you do shtick, you try to make it interesting, you try to make it different, because how many slugfests are you going to look at? As well as Kurt Swan drew them, there's only so many you want to look at. However, I always found writing Clark Kent more interesting than writing Superman. The scenes with Clark, as in Superboy or Superman, there's something going there. You got a character to work with. Superman's kind of a square-jawed stereotype. With Clark, you could kind of break out and have some fun.
Kurt Swan would do such a great job of giving Clark a little bit of a smirk sometimes, because Christopher Reeve was brilliant, but it was different than the Christopher Reeve movie Superman, where he was completely bumbling. There would be a little bit of that, but it was also him knowing that he's Superman and knowing that he was always going to come out ahead of whatever bad, not even the bad guy, but he would always have the rivals in the Daily Planet.
I always kind of hated that conceit that Clark had to be the bumbling schmuck, because if he's not, people might think he's Superman or Superboy. It never made sense to me, because when, like in Superboy, the town was full of kids who could hit a baseball and get good grades and date girls without anybody going, Tom over there, he might be Superboy. They didn't look at people and go, except for Lana, who thought. But again, that's just a shtick. That's the gimmick. But, there was no need for Clark to be such a wuss. It's a literary conceit. It goes back to the Scarlet Pimpernel and Zorro and all those characters, where the alter ego is kind of this, effete character that doesn't seem at all threatening and hides the truth. So, it's a stereotype. It's a gimmick. But it didn't make sense for Clark anymore. When I was doing Superboy, I finally did a scene where he plays ball with the kids, and he hits the ball, and nobody goes, Clark hit the ball, he must be Superboy. And he got a girlfriend, and the whole bit. And then the crisis came along, and so much for that. The hardest thing about writing anything is making your characters human and believable. Whether they're flying through the air or trying to manage Pop's chocolate shop, it's drama. It should all be captivating if it's done well.
Well, I can imagine, especially Superman. Superboy could be a little less of a challenge to write, because it's him learning the ropes. So, and you can have fun with him just learning his powers and things like that. Superman, he's the strongest, he's the fastest, he's the smartest, he's the most morally pure. That it must take a little bit of extra process and creativity to find that conflict.
A lot of it relies on the reader's willing suspension of disbelief. Yeah, well, okay, I believe that, Terror Man? He was a cowboy. He was an alien cowboy. He comes with 6 guns and chaps and the cowboy hat and the whole bit. But he's from outer space. I forget his origin. But Julie Schwartz, who was the editor, liked the character. And so I wrote a few stories using him. And, it was fun and goofy, but after a while, it's like, Superman's having a shootout in a bar with an alien cowboy. You're writing it, you go, it was fun. And again, remember, we're talking about 1984 and 85 and things like that. The percentage of goofy in most stories, certainly at DC, and Marvel had its own fair share. So this was not out of the ordinary, unfortunately.
And I've seen writers, more modern writers, joke about that, where Kevin Smith, when he wrote Green Arrow for a period of time, talked about Ollie Queen almost getting shot. And he's like, you don't understand. I used to fight guys who would attach you to a giant typewriter, and that was the big the Silver Age had that fun stuff, and it was goofy and wacky. And I'm looking at an image from Terra Man fighting Superman, where the cover is him riding Superman like a horse.
I didn't write that one.
He's like, doggone, if you ain't the most rambunctious bronc I've ever rode, Superman, but I aim to break you, wahoo. That is the cover.
That is like the worst gay porn dialogue I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's definitely dialogue that could be reused.
Man, that was the standard in the day, and I could argue that this stuff is no less goofy today. It's just done with a more serious tone of voice. Everybody's square-jawed and clenched teeth and talking through clenched teeth, and nobody is ever standing still, and everybody looks alike. And when you're dealing with characters who can die, but then it's like, no, it's okay, I got better. You kind of lose something there. It kind of makes it tough to have a character that's fully there's nothing at stake. There's a certain bit of unreality about the character, and there's nothing really at stake. I couldn't be in the least concerned at the end of the Avengers movie that, oh my God, half the population is disintegrating. Oh no, what will happen next? Duh. We all know what happens next.
Yeah, there's no stakes, and comics has a long history of that. It really...
It's okay, though. It's, see, what we're missing here is that this is ongoing serialized adventure. It was originally made and designed for people who would read it, for children who would read it for a few years and then move on. So all the redundancies and all the silly crap, by the time you realize the crap is silly, you stop reading it already. And, you haven't had a chance to see the 19th Joker story, so who cares anymore? That was the model. And now we're carrying that model into people who are reading this stuff for 5 years and 10 years and 30 and 40, 50 years. You've got to keep taking it to these extremely insane levels. Because where are you going to go? You're entertaining people who, in the original model, shouldn't still want to be entertained by this stuff. Am I overthinking comic books?
Well, no, it's something that Eric Larson, who went on and he wrote and drew Spider-Man, and then he went and created Savage Dragon, and he talked about that.
Excuse me, he also drew the Doom Patrol in between.
That's right. That's right.
Taught him everything he knows.
I'm sure he writes you a check every month.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Larson, he talked about how you're not supposed to be a fan of Spider-Man forever. You can have affection for the character, but reading that comic for 20 years, you're going to see the same bad guys over and over again. His idea was, okay, you're going to go from Spider-Man, then why not go to Savage Dragon, which had a lot of the same conceits, but was also a little bit more adult skewing.
And I argue you should go from Spider-Man to Jack London or Philip Roth or whatever. But I was an English lit major in college.
And I've told this story before. When I was young, I didn't like reading, and my mom was complaining to, and I must have been 8, 9, 10 years old, and a friend of my mom's, who was a teacher, said, it's like, well, does he like comic books? He's like, yeah, that's the only thing he reads. It's like, get him as many comics as possible. And gave that to me, and became a big fan of Spider-Man, and I got the prose novels, which you've written. You've written some of the...
Yes.
Then going from novels featuring superheroes to then just novels. And I end up... Same thing. I was a secondary ed English major, so I read a ton.
I have a ton of reasons why comic books in general, and Superman in particular, mean so much to me. What they did for me in my an unhappy childhood. It was a place to go for me, and it not only did the comics and the stories themselves give me some sort of escape, but when I got a little older, I started reading. They were always around in my household, but I really started paying attention when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So we're talking about 1960. By the time, when I got older, I discovered fandom. And I made friends through fandom that I never would have, I don't think I would have had friends if I didn't find my fellow geeks. Paul Levitz was a kid in my junior high who was, he reads comic books too. And we met. Here we are 50 some odd years later, still friends.
It's a powerful thing to have in common, especially 30, 40, 50 years ago, before it was cool.
Yes, decidedly, yeah.
Before there were $1 billion movies.
I just posted a picture of myself on my Facebook page yesterday from when I was 13 years old. And you familiar with the character Herbie? Herbie Popnecker?
I don't think I am.
Google Herbie Popnecker.
Okay, I am looking up right now. Oh boy, that is quite a look.
There you go. You can understand why fandom, was so important, because I look like that, but so did everybody else. Or worse. Yay! At some point, and I wrote a memoir recently and about the horror part of my growing up. And now I want to write one about the comics part of my growing up and what happened subsequently. But I realized I was not as much of a fan of the stuff as I was part of the group. Everybody, all my friends would read every single Doc Savage book and every Shadow book and everything. And I'd read 2 or 3 and go, oh, okay, I get it. And I didn't have to read every single one. But I pretended to, because everybody did.
Geek culture and comic book culture, they're just wonderfully inclusive. I remember the first time going to a comic book shop and just how welcomed I felt. And also, these people talked my language, which was so much fun.
Yeah. I always had the excuse that I didn't have to outgrow comics because, this is my job. I need to read them because I need to keep up. When you've got that deep an attachment to this stuff, it's difficult to break away from it. You shouldn't have to, although you shouldn't take up your Twitter feed with rage about the way characters are being treated in the movies.
Oh, there's so much anger.
I don't get it. All right, you don't like the movies, so go read the comic books that you did like. And besides, the movies aren't made for comic book fans. They're made for general audiences who don't know the comic books and don't give a crap.
My mom loves the Thor movies, and she doesn't love the Thor movies because it's so accurate to the comic books that I read in the 80s. She loves it because they're sort of fun, dizzy action movies, and she happens to think that Chris Hemsworth's really cute.
There you go. That's exactly what I was going to say was her rationale. Although I was going to put Chris Hemsworth, or whatever his name is, being cute as being the first reason.
That's why, but
yeah. But it's your mom, so you got to tread light.
You mentioned before you've written several novels, some prose works featuring some superheroes, a Hulk and Amazing Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man by himself. How is it changing that where you don't have the visuals to work with, sort of being creatively, in a lot of ways, a one-man show? I'm sure that you had a lot of feedback and help from editors or other people, but
writing prose is, again, it's a one-man show. When you're writing a comic book script, you're depending on everybody down the line doing their job properly. But no matter what they do, no matter how well they do it, and they mostly do it well, it's still not going to be what's in your head. The writer can envision a story, but they can't put it on paper. They can't draw it. However, when you're doing prose, it's all yours. You get to do it. You get to make the choices. You get to make the decision. You get to choose the angle or the thought or the reason, and what you lose in terms of the visuals, you gain in terms of the internal stuff that you can do. Back then, I wrote those things around 1980. It was 2 of the pocketbooks Marvel novel series, Murder Moon and Crime Campaign. I don't think they made the Booker list that year. You're able to kind of get behind everything, all the characters and how they think and what motivates them. And comic books back then were very heavy in thought balloons. Thought balloons seem to have pretty much disappeared from comics lately. But back then there was a lot of thought balloons, but there was still only so much even Chris Claremont could cram into a balloon. In a novel, you don't have to stop and be stopped by that big block of dialogue or thought or whatever. You can kind of act it out. You can show it instead of just, show it internally. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, it makes you get so much deeper into the motivation.
You get to write the character from the inside out as opposed to outside in, which is what a comic book is, I guess. Say, that's pretty clever.
You'll have to write that down.
I'm jotting.
You've written so many comics, and you've had some nice runs here. Is there one run of comics, because for me, what makes comic books so special is single issues are fantastic, and there's certainly been many single issues of series that I've read that I've enjoyed, but for me, it's always about the unit, the arc. Is there a particular run on a series that you're especially proud of, or you feel like is your definitive work?
I don't know about definitive work. I've worked on so many different kinds of things. I would have to go with my run on Vigilante is one of the highlights, I think. That was a character created by Marv Wolfman, created in Teen Titans, I think, and got his own title. Marv wrote it for a while, and then I did some fill-ins, and then I picked it up. So I wrote like 30 issues or so of it. Over that course of time, it kind of went from being, it was always Marv's character, but it went from being the character the way Marv would have done it to being the character the way I did it, which was very different. And we culminated that run with a character who went insane, crazy during the thing, because he was the title says it, he was a vigilante. And he did things and pushed things to the edge and went over the edge. And we finally reached a point with the character where there was no place to go with him anymore. We had written him into a corner. There was talk about the numbers sliding and cancellation coming soon. So we thought, well, let's aim for the 50th issue and have him commit suicide. He can't face what he's done. And he finally, he takes his own life.
And I remember that issue, and it had a very, very jarring cover to that.
Ken Stacy, yeah. Really
good character and a lot of depth. A lot of pathos to that, and sort of similar to Punisher. And the problem with the Punisher is the guy's a sociopathic serial killer who just happens to kill the right people, which is fine. And certainly a lot of writers have made interesting Punisher stories. But it was like, okay, Punisher, but this is somebody who eventually has to pay for his crimes or address the emotional and psychological toll being that character is, and you actually did that.
Yeah, well, again, I'm much more interested in the character than the costume. The Vigilante was even though it was over-the-top action and violence, it was still grounded in reality for the most part. We had very few super-powered. I'm trying to think. I think there was a character called the Electrocutioner, and I don't even remember if he had natural powers or the power was in the costume. But we didn't use super-powered things except for Peacemaker. But he was also crazy, and that was fun. Writing crazy is fun.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. It lets you work out some stuff perhaps that's in the back of your head.
Not so far.
Paul, tell us a little bit about, you're going to be kicking off a Kickstarter campaign soon.
Yes, on Thursday, March 19th, we're launching the Kickstarter campaign with my pals at Charlton Neo Media for Paul Kupperberg's Illustrated Guide to Writing Comics, which is a illustrated guide by me about writing comics.
You did the writing and you do the art?
No, it's not illustrated that way. It's illustrated with examples of I'm not an artist, I don't draw, but it's illustrated with examples from mostly things I've written, because I figured if I'm writing about writing, I have to talk about how things came about and concepts and motivations and all that. And I really can't take, a Steve Englehart story or a Denny O'Neil story and say, here's what these guys were thinking when they did this. I could only do it with my own stuff. That's the focus, using examples from my career. But I do. It's also not only me. I solicited a bunch of pals in the business to help out. I have contributions from a bunch of people, who provided insights into the creative process, writers, artists, editors, letterers. We got Pat Brousseau, Janice Chang, Tom DeFalco, Steve Irwin, Danny Fingeroth, Robert Greenberger, Rick Hoberg, Todd Klein, Stuart Moore, Michael Avon Oming, Rick Parker, Clem Robbins, Alex Segura, Rick Stacy, and Darren Vincenzo.
Those are some amazing writers. And Tom DeFalco, he was writing Spider-Man when I basically fell in love with the characters.
And he was editor-in-chief at Marvel. Mike Oming, who has done the Powers series with Bendis all those years. Although when he was a young man, I gave him his start as the artist on Judge Dredd when I was an editor at DC.
That's so cool. And I love the Power series. They're going to be wrapping that up soon. I think they're coming out with a graphic novel.
They've been doing it a long time. It's great stuff. I love Mike's art. I just think his style, he's just good. He's just good. And anyway, the book, it's got a foreword by Joe Staten, who's another old pal. We figure I think the first thing we ever did together was the new Doom Patrol in 1977. And the last thing we did together was about a year or two ago when he drew a story for me for one of my Charlton Neo comics. So we've been working together a long time.
So where can people check out and participate in and we'll share a link when this episode comes out, but where should people go to find out more about you and to participate in this Kickstarter?
You can go to paulkupperberg.com, which has all kinds of stuff from me and about me on there. Plus, I have a press release about the book that I just put up there today. You can read all about it, see some the cover, the interior pages. As soon as we're ready to launch, I'll have the URL to share far and wide.
Paul, this has been amazing. Before I let you go, since you're talking about helping people sort of learn to write comics, what would you say is the one mistake young writers or people who are new to the genre, they always make a mistake, and if you could guide them away from this early pitfall?
There are actually two flaws that vie for first place. The first is in art directions, writers asking artists to draw several things happening at the same time in a single panel. Superman is flying over the city and spots Lois Lane down below and swoops down to all right, that's 3 panels. Think about what you're asking the artist to draw. Make sure it's possible to be drawn. Make sure you're not asking them to do several things at once. The second mistake is not identifying characters when they first enter a scene. People walk in the door and you go, hey, what's going on? And it's like, no, who is that? Because frankly, the way a lot of these things are drawn these days, if the guy's not in costume, what's the difference between square-jawed, dark-haired Bruce Wayne and square-jawed, dark-haired this other guy? So use the names. At least when they first enter the scene, hey, Bill, get out of here, Sadie, whatever. Use the name.
God bless the artists, and there's some fantastic artists, but they don't have a lot of time to write, to draw, and giving everyone a facial scar or something distinctive could be a little much. So, yeah, that makes complete sense. Paul, this has been amazing. It's been so cool talking with you. And will you come back?
I haven't left yet.
But after you leave, you'll come back, though.
Sure. Well, after, you'll see. You may be happy I'm gone. But sure, I'd be happy to.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That wraps this episode of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast. Big thanks to Travis Bow. I've been lucky enough to guest on Watchmen Minute and had a great time. You should check out everything Travis related. Also big thanks to Paul Kupperberg. He has had an amazing career, and I was very lucky he shared his time. Great guy. Just a great guy. Finally, I have to give special big thanks to Amy Kenra. She put me in touch with Paul and has helped with this show behind the scenes many times. She is awesome. Upcoming to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, The Answer Man, Thaddeus Howes returns. We talk about many, many things. Till then, stay marvelous.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
Doggone, if you ain't the most rambunctious bronc I've ever rode, but I aim to break you, wahoo.